Hi Tony, thank you for joining us on Rare Diseases Day. It's a real delight and treat for us. Do you mind just introducing yourself? I know you're well known in the Huntington's community, but just in case someone doesn't know you, which I'm sure is very rare.
Great. Well, thank you, Tammy. It's always wonderful to be able to work with Huntington's Victoria. I've been able to work with Huntington's Victoria for about 22 years now while I've been at the Florey, and it's always a highlight when I can participate in anything associated with Huntington's Victoria. And so it means a lot to me on Rare Diseases Day to be a Huntington's disease researcher. I've been on this journey for a long time. Even before I joined the Florey, I was already working on Huntington's disease. And it's a unique experience for a scientist and a medical researcher to be able to engage with the community as tight and as unique as the Huntington's disease community. Because it's an inherited disease, in these families, one of the parents has the disease. Half of the kids on average will have the Huntington's disease gene mutation. They will then go on, because we don't yet have an effective treatment or cure, they will go on to get the symptoms, the disease eventually. Creates a very unique situation where these families are devastated, but on the other hand, I think the research is offering hope. There's been a lot of progress made. There are clinical trials. There's a lot of preclinical progress, including our own at the Florey. So it's a time of hope. And I just love the fact that the science that I'm passionate about can be tied to an important disease like Huntington's disease, and that as well as moving towards an effective treatment, we're also delivering hope, which I think is very important for these families.
Oh, I think that's really well said. And I've had the privilege, as has most of the community, of following your research at the Florey for some time. It's been 15 years for me now, so I'm ageing disgracefully, Tony. But really what I wanted to do is use this day as an opportunity for the community to understand the impacts of environment and diet on their lifestyle and how that can impact Huntington's disease. Are you able to sort of go through that with us?
Yes, I'm happy to, Tammy. So our original discovery, which was more than a couple of decades ago, was the first evidence in Huntington's disease. In fact, it was the first evidence in any genetic disorder that environmental stimulation could be beneficial or therapeutic. And what we showed in our preclinical model was that cognitive stimulation and physical activity combined had a beneficial effect. And since we made the preclinical discovery, our colleagues working clinically have shown that there are beneficial effects of physical activity in Huntington's disease. And there's also some evidence that staying more mentally active, cognitive stimulation, may also have some benefits together with the combination of those two. So that really changed things in Huntington's, but also in other fields. People in Alzheimer's, in Parkinson's, in other disorders have followed up our work and shown beneficial effects of cognitive stimulation and physical activity in those other forms of neurodegeneration as well. So our latest discoveries really started with a major discovery at the Florey about 6 years ago, where we were the first group in the world to show that the gut microbiome was altered in Huntington's disease. So for those who aren't familiar with this concept, each of us in our bodies has about 1 trillion human cells, but also within each of our bodies, there are multiple trillions of microbes. They're mainly bacteria, and they're mainly within your gastrointestinal tract or your gut. That's where most of them live. So if each of us does a pure cell count of the cells in our bodies, and we add all of those up, then it turns out that we're all more microbial than human based on a pure cell count, which is a pretty interesting idea. But what this means, because there's so many of them and they seem so important, is that the gut microbiome seems important for a lot of other organs, not just the gut, but the brain, pretty much every organ in your body. And so we made this discovery in our preclinical model at the Florey, and we found that the gut microbiome, or it's often referred to as the gut microbiota, were altered in our very accurate mouse model of Huntington's, it is, versus the control mice. And so we then worked with our colleagues in Melbourne, Julie Stout and colleagues, in a clinical study where it was shown that in human Huntington's, the gut microbiome is also altered, which shows the power of our preclinical model, but also shows that this is something we should be looking at in terms of clinical Huntington's. So in recent years at the Florey, this has led us to a bunch of other major studies, one of which was to actually take the gut microbiota from the healthy control mice and transplant that into Huntington's mice. And what we found was some cognitive benefits modeling dementia in Huntington's disease. So it seemed to ameliorate the symptoms of dementia and cognitive problems associated with Huntington's in that preclinical model. And that was just a proof of principle. We're not suggesting that that should be a clinical treatment per se, but as a proof of principle with respect to disease mechanisms. And so we've done a series of other studies, the most recent of which is to target the diet, because everything that you eat, your microbes eat. And so understandably, because all of your food passes through your gastrointestinal tract, your microbes also have a meal on the way through. And so in order to make changes to the gut microbiome, the one major way to do that is through a change in diet. And so again, in our preclinical model, we did a study in which we compared a high fiber diet with other diets, and the control diet included. And we found that the high fiber diet was very beneficial, not just on the cognitive deficits modeling dementia in HD, but the affective changes that model depression in Huntington's disease as well. And so this is very interesting because we think the major way that the high fiber diet would be acting would be on the gut microbes, on the microbiome. And so the other very interesting thing about this is that something around diet and high fiber diet is obviously a translatable thing that we could take into a clinical trial, which is the next step. We'd like to get funding to run a clinical trial of these type of dietary interventions in clinical Huntington's disease. In terms of the message that comes out of this right now, I think a lot of what we're looking at here are lifestyle factors. And so I think some of the way of thinking about this is that there may be aspects that are relative to all of us, those of us not from Huntington's families. We all have aging brains, and those of us who don't have the Huntington's gene are at risk of late age Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia or other problems with brain aging. We're all at risk of something or other problems with body aging, in fact. And therefore, these general messages around what we know is healthy for all of us, to be physically active, to have a healthy diet. And if you want to ask what a healthy diet is, then the National Health and Medical Research Council of Australia, the NHMRC, has diet and nutrition pages, which are based on evidence, like everything else based on evidence, that a healthy diet includes a lot of vegetables and fruits, which have a high fiber content, as well as other healthy foods that are known to contribute to what's considered a healthy diet. And so that's beneficial to all of us, but this latest data is saying that maybe it's particularly beneficial to someone with the Huntington's gene. There may be particular benefits there. Same with physical activity, may be beneficial to all of us, but it maybe have particular benefits for someone who's at risk of Huntington's disease. So a lot of these lifestyle factors are relevant to all of us, but they may have specific relevance, and that's what we need to test in future Huntington's disease clinical trials.
And what's so exciting about your research is that it's quite practical. We can all change our lifestyle habits here and now. And so that's something the community can actually look at and as you say, review their diet. And you know this, but in Huntington's Victoria, particularly in your initial research looking at environmental factors, we very much engage with that on a practical level in terms of your physical and cognitive health and practice what we preach and try to engage with the community. And the community have really taken hold of that and try to actually implement that in their own lifestyle. So I think it's fundamental research that you're doing that will actually make proactive changes in people's lives.
Well, thank you, Tammy. And I think the message here as well is we know through work with Australian colleagues, but also colleagues all around the world, there are drugs going in clinical trials for Huntington's, and they're very important clinical trials, which are those who are interested in clinical trials should engage with those clinical trials, because what we're talking about with diet and physical activity, they could be in combination with a new drug. If we have a new drug, unfortunately, we don't have a disease-modifying drug yet, but, the clinical trials are ongoing. And when we do have one, things like a healthy diet and physical activity might work additively or synergistically with the drug to give the biggest benefit. And so that's the way we need to be thinking about it. These ways of changing your lifestyle to perhaps slow down brain aging may work together with a drug or other treatments to give the biggest effect in battling Huntington's disease and perhaps other forms of neurodegeneration.
And I think it's helpful that the community know they can do this now while they're waiting for a disease-modifying drug, that it doesn't mean they can't be proactive in this space right now. And you've been able to give them guidance around your research on what areas to focus on.
Exactly. I think it's a sense of empowerment, the idea, rather than being powerless to this gene mutation that you've inherited and you can do nothing about. Well, maybe you can do something about it. Maybe if, in terms of, knowing how serious it is that you can engage in the healthiest diet you can. And again, I've mentioned the NHMRC guidelines. These are publicly available guidelines that are given to all of us, but they do apply to someone with a gene mutation like Huntington's, that you can think of that as helping your brain and perhaps helping your gut and thus your brain, thinking of what we're talking about here. And one of the areas we've really pioneered in many studies is brain-body interactions. The idea that Huntington's disease is not just a brain disorder, it's a brain and body disorder. And we've pushed that idea further to say Alzheimer's disease is not just a brain disorder, it's a brain and body disorder, as is Parkinson's disease, as is ALS, and so on. It's another way of thinking about it. So if you look after your body, you can not only slow down body aging, which gives rise to a whole range of other disorders, but you can help slow down brain aging as well, which one way to think about Huntington's disease is it's a very specific way of accelerating specific aspects of brain aging, as is Alzheimer's, but Alzheimer's accelerates other parts of brain aging, and Parkinson's accelerates different parts of brain aging, but they're all a form of accelerated brain aging.
I think that leads beautifully into my final question, I promise. How important, because you've been a really leading researcher and involved in our community events, which we're very grateful for. So the community know you very well because you come to our community days, our gala balls. You haven't been to our Move for HD event yet, Tony.
I'll be there next time, Tam.
Must get you in some gym gear and you can do some dancing. I'm happy to invite your colleagues from the Florey to that, can I tell you? Please pass on my invitation.
We'll all come.
How important has it been for you in the role that you perform as a researcher to interact in the personal space of the community?
It's incredibly important for me, Tammy, and particularly interacting with Huntington's Victoria over all these years, because I got into science really being passionate about science. In fact, who inspired me? Possibly David Attenborough with his documentaries, in terms of being interested in biology and life and behavior and so on. And that my passion and my interest got me into science. But once I got interested in science, being involved in health and medical research through an institute like the Florey gives me the best of both worlds, because being a scientist, I think, is one of the best jobs in the world, and particularly if you're passionate about the science. But being a medical researcher is also one of the best jobs in the world, because you're doing something important. You can look in the mirror every morning and think, I'm not just going off to work to get a paycheck, or worst case scenario, some poor people are going to work for a company that ethically they're opposed to, and I won't go into details, but we all know what type of companies I'm talking about there, Tammy. We do. I'll say no more. But as a scientist in medical research, you can be doing something that's fun, that's exciting, that you're passionate about, and that's important, that you're actually improving people's lives. You're making contributions with our clinical colleagues that will lead to prevention, to treatment, to cure. And we're giving hope for that. Before we've delivered a new treatment or a cure, we're also providing hope. So by interacting with Huntington's Victoria, great people like you, Tammy, your staff, but also the patients, their families, the most inspirational people. And it's a dreadful disease. It affects at least half the families. Those without the gene mutations often become carers. It affects them financially, mentally, socially, physically. It's a devastating, it's one of the worst of all human diseases when you add it all up. And yet they're so courageous, they're just so brave. They keep fighting. The people who don't have the gene mutation spend their whole lives caring for the other half of their family. It's very inspirational just to be able to interact with these families. So, and I try and get my staff and students to interact with them as well as much as possible.
So on Rare Diseases Day, I want to take this opportunity to thank you and your team at the Florey for everything you do on behalf of the Huntington's community. There isn't a moment that you're not available to speak to them, to have a conversation with them, to actually inform them about what you're doing. They have an opportunity to meet your team, and that for them makes them feel valued, and they know that there's passionate people like yourselves who are there 150% all every day trying to do the best you can. So thank you so much. And once again, you've made time for us, and I know you're really busy and it means a great deal to us. So please pass on my thanks to the team as well, because they're wonderful people who also give up their time, and it just means a great deal to us. So thank you.
You're welcome, Tam. And my last message would actually be that we've outlined the importance not just of rare diseases, but also more common diseases. And I think the message to anyone listening to this is that we can all do something. We all vote. I can tell you that the Australian government, previous governments, the current government, do not spend enough on health and medical research. We do not spend enough on science. Surely there can't be things a lot more important than our health, than people with diseases like Huntington's disease. And of course, people can donate funds as well and be philanthropists. But regardless of what you donate or philanthropy, we're all voters. And we need to demand of our politicians that they spend more on science, they spend more on medical research. It's dreadfully underfunded. And therefore, the fact that we don't have effective treatments yet is largely because of underinvestment. If we spent as much on health and medical research, and this is not just Australia, this is around the world, as is spent on military expenditure, we would have cured every disease known to man. And that's a fact. We're talking trillions of dollars spent on military expenditure. We could have cured every single one of these diseases. So that's a general message to everyone: should not be afraid to confront politicians and others with the reality that we dreadfully underfund science and medical research.
And you know that we completely agree with you, and I think that's a really good message to send on Rare Diseases Day. Tony, can I thank you once again for your time today? I know that you're extremely busy. Please pass on our appreciation to your team as well. On this Rare Diseases Day, I know the community are going to really appreciate an update on the research that you're all devoting your time to. And we look forward to seeing you all at the community conference.
No, you're welcome. Look, my message is positive. We work very hard at the Florey Institute. We're just passionate about finding ways to prevent, to treat, to cure a whole range of brain disorders and brain and body disorders, including Huntington's disease.